menyampaikan selamat kepada Italia yang telah sukses menjalankan presidensi G20 di tahun 2021. Dan Indonesia merasa terhormat untuk meneruskan presidensi G20 tahun 2022. Kami akan menjamu Yang Mulia dan Bapak Ibu di hamparan pantai Bali yang indah, yang menginspirasi gagasan-gagasan inovatif untuk produktivitas G20 ke depan. Sampai bertemu di Indonesia, terima kasih.
G20 adalah sebuah perhelatan penting di mana Indonesia sebagai presidensi memiliki peran yang sangat strategis di dalam menciptakan kolaborasi kerjasama global di bidang ekonomi di antara negara-negara yang memiliki peran sangat besar di dunia ini. Kita tentu berharap bahwa dengan G20 ini Indonesia mampu menciptakan jembatan-jembatan komunikasi sehingga akan memunculkan koordinasi dan kesepakatan dari para leaders atau pemimpin di dalam KTT yang akan berjalan minggu depan. Tanggung jawab Indonesia sangat besar dan selama ini Indonesia telah mendapatkan pengakuan dan pujian mengenai cara kita mengelola pertemuan yang dianggap mampu menciptakan suatu kepercayaan dan kolaborasi yang sangat baik. Kita berharap ini akan menjadi salah satu modal untuk menyelesaikan masalah-masalah dunia yang memang sangat kompleks dan saling terkait dan tali temali. Dan oleh karena itu, apakah ini kita bicara tentang ekonomi global, inflasi, kemungkinan resesi, krisis pangan, krisis energi, geopolitik, dan berbagai masalah potensi krisis keuangan di negara-negara berkembang atau negara miskin. Itulah tanggung jawab Indonesia. Indonesia seperti di dalam konstitusi kita, bahwa Indonesia memiliki tanggung jawab untuk ikut menjaga ketertiban dunia berdasarkan kemerdekaan, perdamaian abadi, dan keadilan sosial. Ini yang sedang kita lakukan dalam forum G20, menjaga ketertiban dunia agar seluruh dunia mampu untuk recover together, recover stronger, pulih bersama-sama dan pulih lebih kuat. Itu solidaritas Indonesia bagi bangsa-bangsa di dunia.
Halo, selamat sore teman kumparan. Bersama saya Melisa Lolindo. Kita lanjutkan live report dari B20 Indonesia Summit 2022 dan saat ini saya berada di Media Center di mana ini merupakan ruangan untuk para jurnalis ini bisa mengolah pemberitaan terkait dengan B20 dan saat ini acara B20 ini masih berlanjut di mana tadi sudah ada beberapa panel diskusi yang dilangsungkan, yang dilakukan di main hall B20 Indonesia Summit dan saya mau akan langsung menyapa rekan saya Alia Bunga yang saat ini juga berada di area venue untuk B20 Summit. Halo Alia.
Halo Melisa, salam dari Bali. Salam juga teman kumparan semuanya, selamat siang.
Baik, Alia Bunga bisa dilaporkan apa saja panel diskusi yang sudah berlangsung dan untuk agenda selanjutnya seperti apa?
Saat ini saya sedang berada di Media Center Bali International Convention Center dan di sini kita mengumpulkan informasi terkait siapa saja yang sedang berlangsung sekarang memberikan diskusi di forum ekonomi B20 ini. Dan untuk saat ini di Rut Pertamina, Ibu Nika Widiawati sedang memberikan presentasi tentang sustainable development juga dan perubahan iklim. Nah sebelumnya hari pertama dari B20 ini diselenggarakan dari jam 9.30 WITA tadi. Dan itu antusiasnya sangat-sangat besar, dihadiri oleh ribuan delegasi asing dan baik dalam negeri juga. Dan di sini semua investor-investor asing tiba di Bali untuk memberikan pengetahuan, mengajak kerjasama, serta memperluas hubungan ekonomi dan investasi dengan Indonesia. Berhubung saat ini Indonesia bersama dengan negara-negara G20 lainnya juga sedang memulihkan ekonomi pasca pandemi, begitu. Dan di hari pertama ini tadi kita sudah mendengarkan pidato sambutan ya Melisa dari Chairwoman B20 Shinta Kamdani dan juga dari Ketua Kamar Dagang dan Industri Indonesia, Kadin Arsyad Rashid, mohon maaf, Arsyad Rashid. Jadi Kadin adalah penyelenggara dari B20 Indonesia saat ini, selaku Indonesia sebagai tuan rumahnya. Saat ini di Bali sudah pukul 15.56 WITA. Sejauh ini sudah terlaksanakan sekitar 4 plenary session dengan berbagai tema yang berbeda, dengan berbagai fokus yang berbeda, dan masih ada sekitar 2 plenary session lagi hingga akhirnya nanti dilanjutkan dengan summit meeting. Dan di plenary session ini juga dihadiri oleh pembicara-pembicara asing. Dan contohnya itu adalah ada tadi Andre Solistio dari CEO Goto, dan juga ada dari Michael Froman selaku Vice Chairman and President Strategic Growth Mastercard, dan juga tadi juga ada juga Menko Marves Luhut Binsar Panjaitan selaku pembicara di diskusi Sustainable Resource Management for Economic Growth. Gitu. Dan sejauh ini Indonesia sudah melaksanakan berbagai MOU dan diskusi juga, mendatangi beberapa MOU serta juga melaksanakan diskusi. Hasilnya adalah sebagai berikut. Ada beberapa yang sangat menarik untuk diketahui bagi teman-teman kumparan saat ini. Yang pertama adalah PT Vali Indonesia menaikkan perjanjian definitif dengan perusahaan Global Zhejiang Huayo. Nah, mereka akan memproses biji nikel Vali Block dari ada kedatangan dari Pak Erick Thohir di sini tiba-tiba teman kumparan. Mari kita sambut Pak Erick.
Yes. Silahkan baik teman kumparan. Ini situasi terkini, kita akan mendengarkan keterangan atau komentar dari Erick Thohir yang saat ini hadir di Media Center B20 Summit.
The legacy of the Global One Shot Program and Deputy Chairman of Indonesia's Healthcare Policy on Infectious Diseases, and also the program partner. Ms. Emily Stenger-Spiel, the Executive Director of Global Health. Okay, so we understand that healthcare resilience has been a very important thing, especially as we experience the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Baik, Menteri BUMN RI Erick Thohir tadi baru saja ini sampai di area atau di sekitar venue B20 Indonesia Summit, teman kumparan, dan saat ini kita akan melihat bagaimana situasi terkini yang ada di main hall B20 Indonesia Summit, di mana sebelumnya di agenda atau di jadwal yang tertera saat ini merupakan sesi celebrating the milestones and achievements of B20 legacy and task force outcomes, dan sebentar lagi akan dilanjutkan dengan panel diskusi yang bertema Investing in Green Ventures for Sustainable Growth, di mana akan ada beberapa pembicara di sana. Dalam panel diskusi ini diketahui sudah ada sekitar 4 panel diskusi yang sudah berlangsung, dan sampai hari besok masih akan ada beberapa panel diskusi lainnya yang tentunya mengangkat beberapa tema yang berkaitan dengan pembahasan atau tema atau topik yang diangkat dalam G20 ini. Langsung saja kita akan melihat bagaimana jalannya situasi atau panel diskusi yang ada di main hall B20 Indonesia Summit. Ini dia, kita saksikan bersama.
Distribute vaccines at a record pace, and we cannot let this go to waste. So, the Global One Shot campaign aims to bring together key stakeholders, government, industry, and global health organizations around several key missions of consultation on the benefit of life course immunization And we must also diversify the clinical research of novel vaccines such as tuberculosis and malaria for low middle income countries. This campaign is also in line with the Trade and Investment Task Force's policy recommendation to facilitate the innovation, digitalization, and technology adoption to mitigate the next global risk. So, more importantly, this campaign also presents the industry's contribution to the impressive achievement of the Indonesia's G20 presidency in strengthening pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response, such as the establishment of the Pandemic Fund of $1.4 billion under the leadership of our Minister of Health, Bapak Budi Gunadi Sadikin, and our Minister of Finance, Ibu Sri Mulyani. Therefore, the One-Shot campaign has a mission, and its principle will turn all of these principles into concrete global health action. Thank you for your time and attention, and we wait for your support. Thank you.
It actually reminds me of what Mr. Gunadi Sadikin said earlier, invest in health sector, because virus knows no border, right? I'd like to move on to Ms. Phil now. So I believe that GHSC will play an important role in this initiative, but how can the business community here and out there collaborate in support of this initiative?
Yeah, thank you. Before I answer, I just want to applaud Indonesia for hosting us. This is a phenomenal summit. Pak Arshad, Ibu Shinta, Karen, thank you for your leadership. So now on to the question. The Global Health Security Consortium was founded by Oxford University, the Ellison Institute of Transformative Medicine, and the Tony Blair Institute to offer bold solutions at the center of science, medicine, and politics. And it's just been an incredible honor to partner with the B20 as a platform to engage industry and to build support through One Shot, including through our joint industry roundtables that we held in August. I want to express gratitude to all of the industry players who have joined us in the One Shot dialogues. You've shared insights and experience about how we can drive innovation, invest in digital infrastructure for health, and pursue more equitable access to life course vaccinations. A big thank you goes to all of these industry players listed on the screen who have endorsed and joined us in the One Shot campaign, which brings me to everyone here in the audience. All of you business women and businessmen, go back to Minister Budi and remember, the greatest wealth comes from health. And so if you're ready to invest in health, come join us. Snap the barcode, the QR code, and give us your contact. We'd like to work together, have you join us in dialogue and action to further policies and investments that will make One Shot a reality. Together, we can recover stronger and make preventable disease history for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give a big round of applause for B20 Legacy Global One Shot Program. Ibu Phil and Mr. Rampangile, could you please head to the center of the stage? We're going to do the next procession with Ms. Kamdani and Mr. Rashid, as well as the Task Force and Action Council chairs. Now together, Legacy Lead, Partner, Task Force and Action Council chairs will push the button to represent the start of the journey in increasing global equity in vaccine access and making preventable disease history. Shall we do the countdown? In 3, 2, 1. Congratulations for this program, which will increase global equity in vaccine access and making preventable disease forever history. Let's take a picture first. All right, let's do it in 3, 2, 1. Let's do it once again in 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much, Bapak Ibu. Let's give it up for the B20 Legacy programs. We've got 4 different programs here. Ladies and gentlemen, you may please return to your seat. Now I have to move here for the preparation for the next session. So, ladies and gentlemen, we just have witnessed the 4 B20 legacies from the B20 Carbon Center of Excellence, the B20 Wiki, the B21 Global Women Empowerment, and the B20 Global One Shot Campaign. And all these legacies has been supported by more than 30 global companies and the B20 Task Force and also Action Council. And these legacies show that B20 strives to provide tangible and actionable outcomes, and we are very proud of this very, very great milestone. And the ceremonial session that has just elapsed is essential in addressing the 3 focus issues of the G20 priorities, and this being accelerating green transition, promoting inclusive growth, and creating equitable access to healthcare. Ladies and gentlemen, as these priorities will be imperative to ensure the global recovery to be inclusive, innovative, and also collaborative, that requires collective action to recover together and recover stronger. Therefore, through this legacies announcement, we would like to invite all of you here to continue to work with us together to making this from vision to action. As we are still preparing for the stage for the next session, hoping that everyone here is enjoying their time and enjoying this essential B20 forum while not forgetting to enjoy the beautiful cuisine and also the scenery of Bali. All right, I think we are ready for the next session. Continuing on our agenda, we still have several insightful keynote and also panel sessions for you to enjoy. And we will have 2 panel discussions preceded by a keynote address that will set the foundation for the panel discussion. All right, so for your information, we still have 4 different speakers and also 2 panel discussions. I'd like to revisit actually the legacies that we have just witnessed, the procession of the 4 legacies. The first one is B20 Legacy, Carbon Center of Excellence. Actually, you can learn more about these legacies on the mezzanine area, where there are exhibition there where you can learn the legacies. So the B20 Legacy Carbon Center of Excellence is strive to enable the growth of carbon trading toward net zero, and the objective is to become a digital center of excellence to provide business with required knowledge to enter or scale up their carbon trading activities. Number 2, B20 Wiki. This is to scale the next generation mid-sized companies to be part of the global supply chain, and the objective of this is to equip small enterprises to scale up to mid-sized companies empowered by cross-country collaborations such as export market access across G20 countries, digital transformation including key capabilities building. The third one is One Global Women Empowerment, aggregating existing capacities and networks to accelerate and scale impactful women empowerment efforts globally. And the objective of this is to facilitate the acceleration of impactful inclusion of women in business in the global economy by providing digital capability, knowledge sharing, funding and investment, technical support, and supportive policies. And last but not least is the Global One Shot program. The objective of this is to develop a scalable model to increase global equity in the development and delivery of vaccine, and also injectable through strategic collaboration with key stakeholders. And we want to achieve that the pandemic will be forever gone and forever history. Now, are we ready for the next session? All right. We're still having 4 different speakers and also 2 panel discussions, and we're still waiting for the Minister of Investment of the Republic of Indonesia, His Excellency Bahlil Lahadalia, who is on his way to this very main ballroom. But before heading to the next session, we invite you, of course, to join the initiative of B20 Legacy, because they cannot strive and they cannot work alone. They need the support from the business community. And you can choose, actually, not only health sector, but there are 4 different legacies that you can choose from to participate in. The first one is B20 Legacy, Carbon Center of Excellence, and B20 Legacy, which is B20 Wiki, One Global Women Empowerment, or OGWE, and last but not least is the Global One-Shot Program. And talking more about the last legacies, which is Global One-Shot Program, this is also to harness the potential of next-generation vaccines and injectables to help make preventable disease history, ladies and gentlemen. And the background of this program is that vaccines are central to the global COVID-19 response, and we need to capitalize on the next generation of new vaccines and injectables being developed for preventable diseases and future pandemic preparedness. And for the One Global Women Empowerment, I was so thrilled because listening to what Ms. Sinta had to say earlier on the opening section of today's agenda, that 37% of this B20 Summit Committee are women. So let's celebrate women and their continuous effort, and it shows how committed we are in including women in the development and create no boundaries for women participation. Now I would like to welcome His Excellency Bahlil Lahadalia, the Minister of Investment of the Republic of Indonesia. Pak Bahlil, it's nice to see you again and welcome to B20 Summit Indonesia. And it is a pleasure for me to call upon the Minister of Investment of the Republic of Indonesia to deliver his remarks on the topic of promoting open, fair and efficient post-pandemic global investment regime. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Excellency Mr. Bahlil Lahadalia.
Selamat sore. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan. Izinkan saya, para peserta semua, untuk saya memakai bahasa Indonesia karena memang ada peraturan baru untuk kami harus memakai bahasa Indonesia. Karena itu saya memakai bahasa Indonesia. Yang saya hormati saudara saya, Ketua Umum Kadin, Arsyad Rashid, pemimpin masa depan Indonesia,
Mr. Arsyad, the future leader of Indonesia. Let's give him a big round of applause. Ms. Shinta Kamdani as the chairwoman of B20 and President of Asian Development Bank, Mr. Masasa Kuasakawa, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Bali. We all know that the COVID-19 pandemic until now remains unsolved in some countries, and it is a problem that all countries face. And that is why globally we need to promote economic recovery as well as pandemic mitigation. But as the COVID pandemic continues to unravel, we face another predicament, which is the Ukraine war. This is something that we do not want because it will inevitably generate detriment to all of us, including energy and food crises. Indonesia is one of the countries who bear the brunt of the war. And in order to recover from the war, from the pandemic, it is not enough to just resort to business as usual. We need breakthroughs. We need more sustainable investment, more inclusive, more equitable, and more fair. And that is why the Chamber of Commerce initiates our conversation today on how we can be on the same page on promoting the kind of investment that I just talked to you about. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that speaking at 4 p.m. is a Herculean task because I know that you must be quite sleepy. I know that all of you are great CEOs, great leaders of companies who preach your subordinates all the time. But I know that today, listening to all these lectures might not be something that you are used to today. I would like to also add that promoting sustainable investment is a global consensus, and all members of the global community are committed to bolster environmentally friendly industrialization, utilizing renewable energy, and even to a greater extent. Now, in order to produce a product, if it does not take into account environmental standard, then the products will not be competitive in the global market. And that is why I would like to offer to you that Indonesia is a country that I think is extraordinarily blessed with resources. We have abundant resources from including nickel, copper, tin, bauxite, and many other resources. We have vast reserves of renewable energy. We have 12,000 megawatt of hydropower plant in North Kalimantan, for example, 23,000 megawatt hydro plant potential in Papua, near my hometown, as well near Australia and the Philippines, and many other renewable energy reserves and potential, including the ones managed and developed by Pertamina, who is working with other companies to tap into the geothermal reserve. Indonesia is committed going forward that we must build an environmentally friendly, sustainable industry with renewable energy as our contribution to the global community to mitigate the greenhouse gas emission. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, nevertheless, from the bottom of my heart, I have to be frank. As a former businessman myself, who is now serving the people in the government, I would like to share some objective empirical data which may not be so pleasant to be heard. Now, when the world is talking about renewable energy, how to reduce carbon emission, but our policies have been counterproductive to promote sustainable green investment. Only 1/5 of clean energy investment is flowing to developing countries. At the same time, when the world is committed to accelerate the net zero target attainment, in my humble language from Papua, this is called you write something and then you read completely something different and you act differently. And I think this is something that is difficult for us to materialize. So I think we should shy away from double standards. The government can issue regulation and policies, but at the end, the one who is implementing these policies are the private sector. And that is why the role of the private sector in the B20 is of utmost importance on how we can achieve our shared objectives of attaining net zero targets. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to also underscore that when we talk about decarbonization, there are some important issues in our G20 ministerial meeting discussion. There was one issue that we failed to reach an agreement on pertaining to carbon pricing. Apologies to my friends from the developed countries. The carbon credit price in developed countries and in developing countries who have the carbon credit reserve is very different. The price of carbon credit can reach $100 per ton, ton of carbon dioxide. And in developing countries, the price of the carbon credit can be as low as 20 or even $15 per ton. I think this should be a food for thought for all of us, because we need to guarantee equality among us all to achieve shared prosperity in all corners of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not have strong conviction when we rely on unequal formulation for the carbon pricing that is based on different variables on land, for example. For example, in Indonesia, some argues that the carbon credit price in Indonesia is low because our land is still abundant. We have so much forest, mangrove, so the investment is low for us to preserve our environment, and that is why our carbon price is low. So the question is, why don't we just cut down our forest, cut down our mangrove, so that the carbon credit price in Indonesia will be equal with that of the developed countries? But we never think like this. We Indonesians love our own environment because we believe we want to build the world not only for me, for my generation. We want to build our world for the next generation, for our children and grandchildren, to ensure that they also can enjoy their lives in this world. Ladies and gentlemen, I also would like to share the agreements reached by the investment ministers in the G20 on investment. The first issue was attracting value-added investment in the downstream industry. Indonesia is of the view, and many emerging members of the G20 believe that attracting value-added investment is an important instrument from a developing country to become a developed country. I do not fully comprehend the argument of some members who disagree with this perspective. I would like to also add that value-added investment is the key to ensure the protection of the environmental standards. I am grateful for the ability of all G20 members who finally reached an agreement on this value-added investment in the G20. The second of all, we talk about inclusive investment. We talk about sustainable investment. We talk about investment that benefits local communities, indigenous communities, and local enterprises. And early on, there was disagreements about engaging local communities and local MSMEs. We had prolonged discussion and I would like to thank all the ministers from the G20 member countries, including the developed countries, who understand and recognize the importance of promoting linkages between foreign investors and the local enterprises, local MSMEs, because these local communities are the subjects of our development. They should be in the driver's seat. And third, we also agreed that the streamlining of regulation is imperative. As a former businessman myself, I'm fully aware that investors need for things transparency, efficiency, speed, swiftness, and low cost of production. And when I was a businessman myself, I knew that when regulation mandates A, businessmen often tries to work around the regulation to reach B. And it is about time that we stop this unfavorable practices. And in Indonesia, we have undertaken substantial regulatory reform, streamlining 79 laws into one job creation law. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the financing schemes must also be strengthened to promote sustainable investment and to contribute to our economic development. I think that in this B20 forum, there will be great ideas and recommendations on how we can fight for the interests of the private sector. And Mr. Arshad, I would like to thank you very much. Mr. Arshad is actually taking some of my burden as a Minister of Investment. So I thank you very much for shouldering some of my burden. Thank you, Mr. Arshad. And I would like to also appreciate this event because this is a platform for us to exchange our views. Before I conclude, I would like to also add that in the ministerial meeting, we agreed to issue the Bali Compendium, which is a policy toolkit of investment of G20 member countries. It recognizes the policy space of all G20 member countries by promoting mutual respect for the various policies that different countries use. It is about time that G20 member countries have mutual respect. We cannot feel that one country is better than the other. So we need to sit equally low and stand equally high of all members countries. That is critical to realize shared prosperity for all. Thank you. Thank you. And once again, I say to you, I hope that you cannot, maybe soon you can enjoy the sunset by venturing outside. Thank you. May peace be upon us all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lahadalia, the Minister of Investment of the Republic of Indonesia. There are several points that was conveyed by Mr. Lahadalia. One of the most important one, I think, is to recover. We cannot do business as usual, and we need to collaborate to find the best solution for all without no one being left behind. And also, to build sustainable investment and development, Indonesia will produce and use new and renewable energy. Mr. Lahadalia also mentioned that as a businessman himself, who is also active in the government, he points out the importance of policy and its implementation. So there's no double standard in doing business and in decreasing the amount of emission. He also mentioned that to achieve prosperity, we need to sit down equally low and stand up equally high together. This is like Indonesian saying, duduk sama rendah, berdiri sama tinggi. So we need to sit down equally low and stand up equally high together. And he also said that we Indonesians love the environment because we want to leave the legacy to our children and also to our grandchildren. And all investments, he also reiterated that all investments coming in Indonesia must involve local entrepreneurs and also local governments as the subject of development, not merely the object of development. And last but not least, he also mentioned that no one in G20 should feel better than the others, feel freer to do things than the others. So thank you very much, Mr. Lahadalia, once again for your keynote address. Ladies and gentlemen, staying on the topic of promoting sustainable investment to achieve carbon neutrality, now I would like to invite our next keynote speaker. This is the president of ADB to give his keynote address. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. Masatsugu Asakawa.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce for the invitation and for its success as chair of the B20 this year. ADB has been proud to be a network partner of the B20. The B20 task forces on issues such as post-COVID recovery and just energy transition have been tremendously valuable. I am also pleased to share the podium with Mark. ADB is grateful for HSBC's engagement in the work on our Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM. Mark, thank you very much for your support. My friends, let me briefly share with you today some thoughts about the importance of private investments for their fight against climate change. Despite the current economic headwinds, the economic growth of Asia and the Pacific in recent decades has been remarkable. But the uncomfortable truth is that growth has come at a high cost. Our region now accounts for more than 50% of global greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, our region is one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Climate change is putting decades of progress at great risk. That is why our battle against climate change will be won or lost in Asia and the Pacific. We need to take bold and urgent action to address this threat. In response, ADB has stepped up as the climate bank for Asia and the Pacific. We have elevated our ambition to provide $100 billion in cumulative climate finance from 2019 to 2030. We are committed to withdraw from investing in new coal-fired power generation capacity. And we are launching game-changing platforms to scale up climate financing. In our endeavor, the private sector is essential to ensuring the transition to net zero. It is clear that the public sector cannot do it alone. The good news is that climate action is often a good investment. Costs for renewable energy are falling, and demand for low-carbon infrastructure, goods and services is rising. The investment opportunities in developing economies have been estimated at trillions of dollars. ADB is committed to strengthening this promising investment landscape. We will use our convening power, financial instruments, and technical capabilities to pave the way for private sector investment that are compatible with low carbon development. Let me briefly highlight 4 areas where we are working. First, ADB is addressing upstream policy challenges that are hindering private investment in infrastructure. Our work includes support to improve regulatory frameworks like Minister just mentioned, and the capacity of government agencies. Second, ADB is working midstream with public sector agencies to structure infrastructure projects that are commercially viable. Last year alone, we catalyzed more than $400 million in private capital through our PPP advisory services and our project preparation facilities. And third, ADB is working downstream, directly with private sector clients to invest jointly in renewable energy projects. For example, we committed $40 million in 2018 to Indonesia's very first privately owned utility-scale solar plant, a 21 megawatts facility in North Sulawesi. And finally, fourth, we are helping the region transition away from coal-based energy. The Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM, will accelerate the retirement of coal-fired power plants, increase demand for clean energy, and lower overall energy costs. I am so grateful to Indonesia and partners like HSBC who have made this possible. Last week, I had the pleasure of meeting with President Widodo in Cambodia. We discussed the need to mobilize substantial financial resources for the energy transition, and I am proud to say that ETM is one of the many ways that ADB is doing just that. Together with the government of Indonesia, ADB will make a landmark announcement about ETM tomorrow. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me end by inviting all of you to engage with ADB. We want to hear your perspective on the barriers and opportunities to private sector participation in climate action, and we want to work with you. My friends, let's work together to achieve a carbon neutral future by creating a region built on green investments that ensure resilient, sustainable economic growth for all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Masatsugu Asakawa-san, the president of ADB, presenting a material of promoting sustainable investment to achieve carbon neutrality. Now, moving on to the next keynote speaker, please allow me to welcome the Group Chairman of HSBC Holdings to deliver his remarks virtually on the topic of promoting sustainable investment to achieve carbon neutrality. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Mark Tucker.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great privilege to be speaking to you today. My thanks to Asakawa-san, President of ADB, for his wise words. The B20 is a critical force for engagement with the governments of the G20 and beyond, particularly during a time of growing risk and uncertainty globally. The recent surge in energy prices is a timely reminder of how dependent our global economy is on fossil fuels. Issues around security of supply have forced some European countries to reconsider using more coal, and has also encouraged some emerging markets to delay their transitions as the market floods with cheaper Russian oil. The current challenges have provided an economic and social imperative for governments and businesses to invest in more sustainable, more robust, renewable energy sources, and may accelerate decarbonization in some countries. There has never been a clearer economic and environmental case for the transition to net zero, and it provides one of the greatest challenges and opportunities facing the global business community. If we get it wrong, climate risks will only grow, endangering economic growth and the quality of life across the planet. And that is particularly true for developing markets, which are generally more exposed to extreme weather events. However, if we get it right, we can secure long-term resiliency for our businesses and long-term safety and prosperity for the communities we serve. The key question is, how can we facilitate the vast sustainable investment needed in the coming decades? In particular, how can we focus efforts on businesses in the B20 countries that are most reliant on fossil fuels and where emissions will be harder to abate? Time is of the essence. Fossil fuel consumption continues to increase globally, particularly in the developing markets. The longer we wait, the more we are locking in carbon emissions for the longer term. At HSBC, we're keenly aware of the need to show leadership by acting at pace to scale up the net zero transition, and of our responsibility to help finance the transition. When we think about this topic, we focus on three main areas: planning, cooperation, and innovation. Firstly, planning. Every business should aim to establish a net zero transition plan. That means understanding their existing carbon footprint and establishing credible, ambitious plans to reduce it. This, of course, can be extremely difficult, not least because of the challenges in measuring carbon emissions within a company's operations, its supply chain and end user groups. To do this successfully requires good quality, granular and standardized data. Banks like HSBC face significant challenges in collecting data from clients that is comparable and consistent for meaningful aggregation, particularly from corporates in high-emitting sectors. There are multiple initiatives at national and international levels to address this critical issue, with two of the most prominent being the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which has significant uptake across Asia, and the International Sustainability Standards Board, Emerging Sustainable Disclosure Standards and Climate Disclosure Standards. However, when they have transition plans, businesses can more easily access transition financing from banks and give shareholders greater confidence in their long-term prospects. Looking ahead, many companies will face increasing issues, perhaps even existential issues, in terms of access to finance if they don't adapt and publish meaningful transition plans. That is why we're working very closely with our clients on developing their transition plans, especially those in sectors and countries where carbon emissions are hard to abate. We've already started publishing our own transition plans for specific sectors such as coal, and we'll publish the first group-wide plan next year. Second, cooperation. Nobody here is a stranger to the fact that we must continue to work together with other businesses, policymakers, climate experts, and community groups to build frameworks that support more sustainable investment. That means better standards on climate risk disclosure, smarter regulation to develop the right market signals for investment, and new financing models bringing together the public and private sector. HSBC is closely involved in organizations like the Sustainable Markets Initiative and the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. We believe that through these, we can help develop practical solutions that will benefit banks and businesses as they transition. Finally, and very importantly, innovation, both financial and technological. Many of the technologies that we need for the transition to net zero are currently subscale and urgently need greater investment. Others have yet to be developed. In many emerging countries, we also see issues with access to financing for existing standard and commercially viable technology solutions, such as wind and solar. This may be because ratings are lower or procurement processes are not robust, a lack of local expertise, or an inability to get competitive bids from the private sector. So we need to think creatively about how we crowd in sustainable financing through investment products and mechanisms. For instance, using government or development bank financing to de-risk the opening construction stages of projects and drawing in private finance for the later operating phases. This type of blended finance will be particularly useful in developing markets where investment risks are generally higher due to a range of different factors. However, blended finance, particularly for middle-income countries, demands a lot more innovation from governments, multilateral development banks, and the private sector. For innovation to occur, it must be rewarded. The conditions for this do not exist even as we approach 10 years of the G20 looking at blended finance, and we must be systematically addressed if we are to see blended finance scale. We also need to finance the development of innovative technologies, sustainable aviation fuels, green hydrogen, or even grey hydrogen as an interim measure, and floating wind farms, to name just a few. Uniting all these areas is the need to act with pace and ambition. It's clear we've reached a tipping point. Almost every conversation I have with clients, regulators, policymakers, and shareholders includes the transition to net zero. Now is the time for action. We need to make progress on sustainable investment in the coming decade to ensure we hit the net zero target by mid-century. As I said at the opening, the current energy price disruption presents a huge incentive for change. Now we must focus on making sure that businesses in all B20 countries have the right financing tools at their disposal to start their transition journey. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for the time. That was Mr. Mark Tucker as the Group Chairman of HSBC Holdings that was delivering a remark promoting sustainable investment to achieve carbon neutrality. And some points were pointed out by Mr. Tucker that HSBC is committed to helping the transition to net zero emission, and this consists of several steps, so of which are planning, which is work very closely with clients in determining the plan that they want to achieve, and also innovation, financial and technological innovation. And he also said that now it is the time to action doing sustainable investment in order to achieve the NZE, or net zero emission, by 2050, and HSBC is ready to assist all of us in doing so. Now, ladies and gentlemen, after listening to the incredible insights provided by our two speakers, we will now listen to our distinguished panelists discussing the topic of investing in green ventures for sustainable growth. This topic will be delivered by the moderator, Jessica Chim, founder and managing director of Eco Business, and we have four speakers: Radoslav Domagalski-Labetsky, CEO of Rafako; Datuk Tengku Muhammad Taufik, President and Group Chief Executive Officer of Petronas. We also have Michelle Chrysostomo, Chairman of Enel Group; and last but not least, David Griffin, founder and CEO of Sun Cable. And now I would like to invite Jessica Chim on stage to moderate the session of investing in green ventures for sustainable growth. Also, please welcome Mr. Radoslav Domagalski-Labetsky, CEO of Rafako; Datuk Tengku Muhammad Taufik, President and Group Chief Executive Officer of Petronas; Michelle Chrysostomo, Chairman of Enel Group; and David Griffin, founder and CEO of Sun Cable. Jess, take it away.
Thank you to the B20 for this opportunity to moderate this very important conversation here today in the beautiful island of Bali. I'm Jessica, the Managing Director of Eco Business. We're Asia Pacific's largest media and business intelligence platform dedicated to sustainable development, and I'm delighted to be your moderator today. Now, it's clear that we are in the midst of an unprecedented era in which major forces are driving many systemic changes across our global economy. And nowhere is this more evident than in the energy transition that's currently underway. But while we are facing a climate crisis, countries are still grappling with the effects of the global pandemic, and developing countries are still driving their development agenda to address poverty and energy security. We are faced with the challenge of requiring an incredibly large scale of change in a very narrow window of time. And this decade is when urgent and sharp reductions and decarbonization has to be made. Now, the B20 Task Force on Energy, Climate and Sustainability has made collaboration between developed and developing countries a central theme to the call to action. Gotong royong, as they say in Bahasa, and in Chinese we say 分工合作, which means that if you share the work, we can go faster and further. Indeed, this has also been the central theme at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, where we've been talking about loss and damage climate finance and the collaborations between developed and developing countries. But how will this work in practical terms? And how can we unlock blended finance, both public and private investments, into sustainability-driven infrastructure, technologies, and solutions? And how do we build this pipeline of investment-ready projects? I'm delighted to have an illustrious panel with me this afternoon. And you know, the chairwoman of B20, Shinta, mentioned this morning about the B20 communique recommending actions to the G20. I think this is a great opportunity for the voice of business leaders to be heard. So I'm going to just dive right into it, Taufik. Petronas, you know, the major Malaysia state energy giant, has been increasingly investing into renewable and clean energy. But the energy transition is not happening fast enough, and also at different pace in parts of the region. And sometimes it feels like it's one step forward, two steps back. And of course, we also have a very tough macroeconomic environment complicated by the war in Europe. What are your views around the energy transition that's happening in Asia right now vis-a-vis the world?
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you for having me. I would like to thank the organizers of this forum in B20 for extending this honor to us. And I'm proud to be here with such distinguished colleagues. Yes, we're Malaysia's national oil company. That is how we came to be. We were born out of an act of law, the Petroleum Development Act in 1974. But as we grew and as we sought to solve issues for communities beyond just providing them oil and gas, perhaps the question at hand needs to be refined. There has often been a question posed to the oil and gas industry, which is almost an ultimatum. It's a pivot or perish. I would surmise in today's world, it is a question of actually, can you pivot responsibly or everyone will perish? This is an existential question for oil and gas players. For Petronas, embodied in our purpose, we want to become a progressive energy and solutions partner, enriching lives for a sustainable future. You may find that purpose curious because the words oil and gas are now absent. We find ourselves in a situation where we are inherently, as an oil and gas company, dealing with a depleting resource. As we find this, we are also now offering, very much in a focused and concentrated fashion, after we made our commitment to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, other energy, cleaner energy solutions at pace, and this is borne out by our commitment to carve out up to 20% of our capex to decarbonize and enter into green energy. But we also realize that the world does not have the system fully ready for this transition wholesale. You have heard the terminology of a just and responsible transition being bandied about. I think this is absolutely true in the context of Asia, and ASEAN in particular. Over 600 million population. We're approaching 6 trillion GDP by 2040. Seen to be an engine of growth, very severely dented after the pandemic. And here's another nugget of information. Many forget that energy prices are very deeply subsidized. In fact, organizations such as OECD and IEA have attested close to 700 billion worth of subsidies were disbursed in 2021. And as we come out, as you've mentioned, through a very delicate period where we're still recovering from the pandemic has served to widen the gap between developed and emerging even further. This has thrown a huge spanner in the works. If in the immediate near term, the issue to tackle is energy security, oil and gas players, energy providers should be working together. It should not be a conversation where one or the other is excluded, because we're all part of a larger question in serving the energy needs of a world that wants to grow again. Of course, the events of February this year have thrown a huge curveball, given the unfortunate incursion of Russia into Ukraine. That removed 155 BCM of gas from Europe. We had 40% out of the question immediately, out of the equation. And I think my compatriots will probably comment there, the imbalance is not something that you can easily correct, which is why the transition, if I go back to that phrase of being just and responsible, means we need to take account of stakeholders everywhere in the world with their own idiosyncrasies, different starting points, and different cost of living challenges. And I guess as an oil and gas player right now, evolving into a fuller energy superstore, I believe we all have a shared responsibility.
Thanks very much, Taufik. Many important points raised there. In fact, this just transition is a key point in the policy paper, and we've also seen that there are communities in which jobs are lost, and this just transition where you're upskilling workers to take on new jobs is very important. I'm going to go to David, actually, because the Sun Cable project is one of the most ambitious solar projects in this region. Can you share a little bit more about that and tell us about your challenges of getting this off the ground, and what is your outlook on the region?
Thanks, Jessica. So Sun Cable's marquee project is the Australia-Asia Power Link. And yes, it is the biggest in the region. It's also the biggest in the world in terms of new renewable energy infrastructure. We are developing an 18 gigawatt solar farm, about 40 gigawatt hours of storage to enable 24/7 dispatch of 3 gigawatts of power from Northern Territory of Australia to Darwin and then on to Singapore. That will deliver up to 15% of Singapore's electricity demand. So it's a major undertaking. It is a first of a kind in terms of it being intercontinental transmission of electricity and the sheer scale of the generation involved. But importantly, it has to be a first of many. This region shares characteristics that is global. Where the renewable energy resources are tend to be remote from where the loads are. So we have to be able to capture those renewable energy resources in extremely large scale and transmit that energy over very long distances to where it's needed. So I guess the challenges that we're facing with that is that we're utilising technologies that already exist, but they've never been put together at this scale in this particular configuration. So our biggest challenge is finding the way to optimise the design. If you consider it as a 5,000 kilometre long machine, and it's a machine that we have to repeat. We have to build this many, many times. And when you've got a machine that is that long, there are millions upon millions of potential design inputs. And so it's way beyond any human's capacity to do that. So we are relying a lot on artificial intelligence to help us with the design, to really optimise it. Because when you're in the multi-gigawatt scale renewable energy project game, and that's what is going to become the norm, you have to eke out, it is an opportunity to eke out small percentage gains that conventional, traditional solar or wind farm development in the hundreds of megawatts haven't been motivated to find. So you say what's the biggest challenge? It's really the biggest opportunity is to find all those things that you can do with gigawatt scale projects to improve efficiency and drive down cost so that you can repeat it time and time again.
Thank you very much, David. I think the project serves as inspiration to the region and the world in terms of what you can do when you have collaboration between countries. I want to come to Michelle now. You're a member of the B20 Indonesia Task Force for Finance and Infrastructure, and I've seen the policy paper. It's a solid one with many recommendations. Can you share your thoughts on what are the salient points that B20 leaders can take away, and what are some of the key roles that business can play in the context of finance and infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question, and really glad to be here, and thanks for the very warm hospitality from our Indonesian friends. Well, the work of our task force has been essentially driven by the very basic consideration around the infrastructural gap between developed countries and developing countries. And the essential, I think, achievement of the task force has been to focus on the necessity to create finance products that will be supporting the projects which are needed in order to fill this infrastructural gap. So the point is, how should we structure in this product? The blended finance, we have seen the ADB presentation, the keynote speech earlier, is definitely one of the solutions. And we should be associating the intervention of public finance or the intervention of the finance from multilateral development banks in the context of structured finance instruments so that we can leverage on public fund to have the support we need to have private funds flowing into sustainable projects. So the focus is financial instruments on one side with a blend between public and private finance. On the other side, a pipeline of sustainable projects. That's, I think, is the key, in a way, achievement of our task force conceptually. Then I think the point is, how can we have the finance system supporting this growth? And here, if you look at the numbers, I don't think we are going with the right pace, with the right speed. The finance system is still behind. There are a number of factors that could be enabling the finance support for developing green infrastructures, sustainable projects, which has very much to do with the approach of looking at the climate risk as a risk from a financial point of view, therefore leading to making the financing more difficult, or whether the climate risk should be the driver towards giving financial support to a sustainable strategy, i.e. a strategy that will be against the climate change and therefore will be minimizing on the long term the climate risk. This is, I think, where the finance system is stuck with in this very moment. So finding the balance between a proper risk approach from a financial point of view and a vision in respect to the fact that the credit should be flowing towards a sustainable project, I think is the key challenge we have in front of us today. Without this, I don't think the transition will be going with the right speed, with the right pace.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for putting the focus squarely on the role of finance. And the investment minister had said previously that only a fifth of investments, clean energy investments, are going to developing markets, where actually the developing markets are growing the fastest. So thank you for those perspectives, and I'll come back to that. Coming to Radoslaw, you operate in a region where it's being heavily impacted by the energy crisis and the Russia-Ukraine war playing out. And it's also a very tough macroeconomic environment that we're seeing, with the markets reaching huge volatility and with the cost of living crisis as well. How is your organization approaching this very tough environment and continuing to drive energy stability as well as sustainable investments?
Thank you very much for this question. Yes, indeed, we are facing a lot of challenges in the European Union right now, of course, because of the conflict or war in Ukraine, because of the pandemic situation as well. We have huge problems with coal and gas supplies, but it doesn't mean that we should stop or slow with energy transition in the European Union. On the contrary, in my opinion, we should even accelerate the energy transition, because energy transition is kind of independency from external sources. It's very important in the European Union, which is very much dependent on coal and gas from Russia and from the East. So, of course, we have a lot of challenges in terms of financing, regulations, and involvement of commercial companies in this new situation. Because sustainability means right now in the European Union also security, because we are facing some situations which we thought never can happen, like attacks on critical infrastructure. What happened a few weeks ago on the Baltic Sea, the gas pipeline has been exploded. So we have to include in our power balance some external situation which may happen in the future. So in order to accelerate energy transition, we have to properly define what does it mean to decarbonize industry. Decarbonize doesn't mean that we have to shut down all the mines or all coal units, especially in the countries like Poland, which is heavily dependent on coal. In our engine, by the way, we are as a Poland, we are in a pretty much the same situation like Indonesia, which is also heavily dependent on coal. In Poland, 70% means energy comes from coal. So what we are trying to do in Poland and in the European Union is to manage this transition period. We want to invest to retrofit coal units, not to shut them down, keep them not as a base, but use them only in the peak time, because in that way we can improve efficiency, we can reduce significantly pollutions, and we can support renewables at that way. And what is the role of commercial companies like my company, for example? We have to properly cooperate with regulator, with the government, because energy sector is heavily dependent on regulations, European regulations, local regulations, and we know that investments in energy sector require a lot of capex spendings. The profit return is even more than 10 years in some particular situations. However, energy sector is one of the most innovative sectors. So I'm not afraid of perspective of the commercial side of energy sector, but we need good communication in terms of incentives, regulations like capacity market in some cases, and others. So we need to promote completely new sources of renewables, like small modular reactors, which is very promising technology. So technology is coming, but we need access to financing. We need tailor-made financial instruments like guarantees, insurances, many like this. So it's a very complex situation because we have to reorganize the whole industry. So this is exactly what we are trying to do in the European Union, facing the completely new situations. So apart from nuclear energy, like modular nuclear energy, we've been trying to explore hybrid renewables to combine wind and sun energy together with energy storaging systems, which is probably one of the most promising technologies, which is going to be kind of breakthrough probably if it's going to happen in the large scale. We've been trying to promote very efficient way how to operate existing coal units, just to significantly expand efficiency. So there are a lot of technologies which are coming. If we properly communicate with regulators, governments, I'm sure that we can manage those challenges in terms of energy transition.
Thank you very much. I think there's a lot to unpack there, and the complexity of this transition really is underscored by the challenges that you mentioned. And just a follow-up question, perhaps, we are seeing climate protests in Sharm el-Sheikh, from the youth all kind of rallying for the acceleration of this energy transition to happen. But at the same time, we have to keep the lights on, there's energy security issues. How do we actually help to communicate the nuances of this complex transition, and how do you think we can accelerate that even with all these challenges? Perhaps I get Taufik to respond, because Petronas, you contribute a huge amount of money to the state budget, for example, and I'm sure that you must face quite a lot of these challenges.
Look, I think the world has to acknowledge that the immediate challenge is to address emissions. I think the world's economic growth and the need for energy is very difficult to divorce. Therefore, as you deal with this, even as we move on to efficiencies and move on to renewables, there is going to be a transition period. And this is where we have to be responsible in executing this transition. You mentioned Petronas' role. I think there are many other NOCs who are also probably carrying catalytic responsibility. Within our own parameters, of course, or the parameters of our employment, we have about 50,000 employees. But there are 150,000 people working in 4,000 vendors and service providers. So there's an entire ecosystem and the multiplier effect, and I'm sure my colleagues from Pertamina, other national oil corporations such as Ecopetrol, will all see this similarity, that there's an expectation that this activity will be spurred. That's one dimension at a company level. At a country level, as I mentioned earlier, there is still a dependency of almost 700 billion of energy subsidies. What's the incentive for these people to switch to renewables? This is where I think I would like to commend all my fellow panelists. There is a clear need. There is a clear need for policy coherence and address this as a transition rather than a revolution. If you do it as a revolution irresponsibly, you will get social unrest. I'm just looking at the clock on these displays here, Jessica. I don't want to intrude into the comments of my other panel members. There is a pathway. Everybody has a different pathway. The B20 is an extremely useful platform to be able to help people shape, accelerate each other's pathways if learnings and if that finance can be unleashed. Unfortunately, last comment, because unfortunately it was brought up by Michelle earlier, we need to understand this finance should have ESG as an outcome rather than a hurdle. If you impose it as a hurdle, it will have the absolute opposite effect of promoting energy transition. The exact proportions that you are seeing today, only a fifth of that development happening in emerging economies, will repeat itself, and by that time, the shared atmosphere will suffer.
Thank you, Taufik. I'm being told that we need to wrap up this panel, so just one rapid-fire question to wrap up the panel and any final thoughts. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing that will help to accelerate investments into sustainability-driven ventures, what would it be? Michelle?
Well, I would cancel the word but when we talk about the energy transition. Energy transition, but we need to be responsible. No, I think energy transition and we need to act. That's, I think, is where in this but, where where we can find the sand in the box of the energy transition. I think we can do, if not a revolution, something very similar to a revolution. And I think altogether, the finance system, oil and gas companies, utilities, energy companies should be working towards this objective. I'm sure that we have resources, public and private, to support a just transition. It's purely a matter of whether we want it or not. I don't think we really want it if we continue to keep the but between the energy transition and all the issues that we are able to tackle globally.
Very well said. David?
Manufacturing capability and capacity. When we look at the projects we're developing and what our colleagues are developing, every component is in short supply, everything. And the scale of the energy transition, I think, is still very poorly understood. It is far bigger than anything in human history. We need more manufacturing capacity, and we need it close to where those projects are rolling out. So for us, we need to see a lot more manufacturing capacity of everything in the region.
Thank you. Radoslav?
Very shortly, I would give up with gas as a temporary source of energy in the scale as was predicted. I would rely more on innovations and especially in renewables. We have to accelerate renewables.
Thank you. Taufik, you want one last thing?
Policy coherence, and I'll stop it there. This is the B20. They know what they are talking about.
Wonderful. On that note, thank you so much. Thank my panelists for such an interesting discussion. I think the organizers want us to be able to see that sunset. So really pleased to be able to host this conversation with you all. Thank you.
Jessica Chim, thank you so much for moderating this session, and also to our speakers, Radoslav Domalski-Lebecki, CEO of Ravaco, Datuk Tengku Muhammad Taufik, President and Group Chief Executive Officer of Petronas, Michelle Crisostomo, Chairman of NL Group, and also David Griffin, founder and CEO of Sun Cable. And there are many insights that we gained from the previous discussion, but it's really interesting what Datuk Taufik has mentioned, that in November 2021, Petronas announced its aspiration to achieve net zero carbon emission by 2050. And with this target in place, Petronas is allocating 20% of its capital expenditure for decarbonization projects and expansion into cleaner energy solutions from 2022 to 2026. And also it's really interesting what Michelle Crisostomo, Chairman of NL Group, also pointed out, that we're not at the right pace on realizing net zero emission. We need to run faster. I think that echoes to our situation today. And I found a very interesting study on NL.com, that a recent study by the NL Foundation and the European House, Ambo-Rossetti, shows that immediately accelerating investment in decarbonization will actually cost less and will have significant positive impacts on the economy, the population, and the environment. This is a very intriguing research that you can check on NL.com, that a recent study by the NL Foundation and the European House, Ambo-Rossetti, shows that immediately accelerating investment in decarbonization will actually cost less and will have a significant positive impacts on the economy, the population, as well as the environment. And the study also outlines that a more decisive change of pace concerning decarbonization would require fewer resources compared with a less ambitious approach. And David Griffin also pointed out many interesting facts, but I'd like to point this, that Sun Cable plans to supply solar power to Australia, to Singapore, and eventually to Indonesia through the world's longest subsea high voltage cable linked to a 17 to 20 gigawatt solar farm, as well as energy storage facility of up to 42 gigawatt hour in Australia's Northern Territory. That was an insightful session moderated by Jessica Chim, and we gained new insights and also information that we hope will be beneficial for you all. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to move to the next session, starting with a keynote address to set as a foundation for our next panel discussion. I would now like to invite the Group CEO of Standard Chartered Bank to deliver his remarks on the topic of creating a sustainable, resilient economy through innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Bill Winters.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'd like to offer my thanks up front to the B20 organizing group for pulling together such a fantastic set of events, and of course pulling us all into this wonderful venue. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. I wanted to take just a couple of minutes up front to cover three topics. The first is going to be the role that technology is playing and can play in our transition to a low-carbon economy. Second is talk a little bit about how we're going to fund this transition, because it's clear that we're lacking some of the money. And third is the interplay between the financial services sector and government. So the various roles that we can play to help government get to the point where we can accomplish these very lofty ambitions that we've all set ourselves. Now first, let's just start with technology. The probably key point to keep in mind is that 30% of the technology that we need to affect this transition to a low carbon economy doesn't exist today. It is as yet undiscovered. So we know that there are many technologies that work, but that are uneconomic. There are many more technologies that we can only imagine today. In order to get that technology into our operating lives, we're going to have to take some pretty dramatic steps, and we're going to have to scale them quickly. So we're all very familiar with the example of solar panels, PV cells, that reduced in cost by 95% over 30 years, by 85% over just 10 years. More or less the same with lithium-ion batteries. That's good news. The bad news is it took 30 years to get that 95% reduction, and we don't have 30 years. So we've got to take these technologies that are proven, we know that they work, and catalyze the scaling of those technologies, which of course will require some combination of subsidization from somewhere. Where could that subsidy come from? two generic sources, public sector and private sector, and that will be a recurring theme in my comments. The public sector has a role to play, but the primary role has to be to leverage the public sector into the private sector, or to lever the private sector into the game, because that's where the bulk of the money is. And we know at this age of severe restrictions in government funding that bringing the private sector to bear is key. So we'll talk a little bit about how that can happen in just a moment. When we look at transition financing, we know that businesses in developed markets have a pretty clear line of sight on where they're going to get the money for their transition finance. In Western Europe, if you have a renewable power project or a transition project for green steel, for example, there's a line of sight on probably 80 to 90% of the required financing for that project. If you're in sub-Saharan Africa, the number is less than 10%. So less than 10% of the funding that's required is visible, which means that it's not going to be done. So that transition in key developing markets will simply not happen at all. Without the help of the developed market economies and governments, the developing countries will not execute their transitions. Now, I was very encouraged by what I saw coming out of COP27, not in all the detail, but at a high level. In particular, looking at the JETP that's being organized with Indonesia, where there are many, of course, critical parts of that, including public sector funding, private sector funding, but very importantly, there's a recognition that without providing the right market mechanisms for the private sector to come in alongside the public sector, it will be difficult to get there. And the mechanisms that were put out by, in particular by John Kerry under his proposals for an ETA, but also very consistent with the Indonesian ETM, is one of using offsets, using the carbon offset market to monetize effectively the cost of decommissioning coal-fired power plants or other similar projects. Perhaps the same sorts of technologies can be applied to research to tie back to that scaling of technology question that is so vexing. Pretty clear to me that we need to do all of the above. We need to scale existing technologies. We need to develop new technologies. We need to protect the existing carbon sinks, so using offsets and other mechanisms to protect the rainforests and the other indigenous forests of the world. And we need to incentivize the creation of alternative power sources of the renewable variety. This can really only happen if we bring the public and private sectors together. We talk frequently about the role that the multilateral development banks are playing, the World Bank and others. I'm afraid to say that so far, the amount of financing that's been committed by these MDBs is a tiny fraction of what's needed. We're talking about billions of dollars when what's needed is trillions. As concerning to me is that the fact that for every $1 of MDB funding, it's only crowding in $1 of private sector funding. That kind of one-to-one leverage gets us nowhere. Let's think about something different. Let's think about reconstructing the way that MDB financing is delivered so that it's 15 times the size that's currently being delivered. How does that happen? What happens when the developing countries that own the MDBs are increasing their shareholding, increasing capital. And then the second feature that I would recommend is that we get leverage not of 1-to-1, but of 15-to-1. How do you do that? The MDB money has got to be taking out the risky slice or a risky slice of the project. 15 times 15 begins to make a difference. I'm afraid 1 times 1 will not get us there. This is the challenge of our time. The tools are in place. The incentives are getting to be in place. The mechanisms are in place. We need to put the money to work in the right way. So with that, I will hand over to my esteemed panelists, and we'll carry on with this discussion. Thank you very much.
Very much, Mr. Bill Winters, Group CEO of Standard Chartered Bank, creating a sustainable, resilient economy through innovation. So, ladies and gentlemen, we now arrive at this is the last session of today's agenda, and this is going to be very interesting because it will touch on creating a sustainable, resilient economy through innovation. And for this discussion, the moderator would be Hans Paul Bergner, Managing Director and Global Chair Emeritus of Boston Consulting Group, And the topic, once again, is creating a sustainable, resilient economy through innovation. And now I would like to invite all the speakers. We have Anderson Tanoto, Managing Director of RGE Group, John Morsey of Bloomberg Neff, Michelle Kurtika, COP24 President, Jennifer Westacott, Chief Executive Business Council of Australia, Shobana Kamineni, Executive Vice Chairperson of Apollo Hospitals Enterprise Limited, and Chow Yan, President Director of Virtue Dragon Nickel Industrial Park. I would like to hand over the session to Hans-Paul Bruckner, please.
Very good. Good afternoon, and thanks for staying for the very last panel session after a long day, and hopefully a day with lots of ideas and thoughts and food for thought for you. So creating a more sustainable and resilient economy through innovation is really key, obviously. And we have a large panel and lots of questions and lots of great examples, as we have seen in our discussion which we had beforehand. So I would like to jump right into it and start with John Moore, and ask him about, how do you see technology and innovation really creating opportunities for a more sustainable and resilient economy?
Thank you, Hans. And I think it is, it's essentially a technology transition that we're going to go through. There's $100 to $150 trillion over the next 30 years going to get invested in clean technology. So clean technology will be absolutely key. We call them Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 technologies. There are technologies that exist today that really need scaling. So the wind, solar, batteries, EVs, that really needs to scale. So that's mobilization. And then there's sort of Pillar 2 technologies which really need innovation. So CCS, hydrogen, those kinds of things. Actually, Bill said those are things that are uneconomic today. So those are the things that really need investing in to bring down the technology costs. So I think that's, that's where that investment will go. The other thing I'd say in terms of resilience, the supply chains will just need to be designed such that we're not too dependent on any single place. We've seen in Europe with the dependence on gas, on Russia, just how painful that can be. So I think as these new industries are built, we need to just keep an eye on resiliency.
Very good.
And the final point I would just say is, it's not just about technology. Clearly, you need policy and you need finance to line up to support all of that technology. So those three important components. Thank you.
Very good. Joe, as the president of Virtue Dragon Nickel Company, you have some specific examples where you, through your innovation technology, you created a really more sustainable product, nickel product and steel.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I need to apologize to everyone because my English level is not as proficient as possible. For respect, I prefer to use Chinese. But luckily, we have the translator. Yeah, let me start to answer the question. 我认为当前国际环境充满不确定性，这对全球经济和每个企业的韧性带来巨大挑战。我们应该清楚地看到，这个印尼盛产一种植物叫做棕榈树，它面对狂风暴雨，它始终能够屹立不倒，不被折断。其主要原因就是因为棕榈树内部有坚强的韧性。
Very strong and resilient fibers. President Xi Jinping that the technology is the first of all, talent is important, the most important. So let us understand that the technological innovation is a very important way to strengthen our enterprises. And through our understanding of the nickel, Indonesia using multiple technologies, we have greatly increased the utilization of resources. on water, electricity, wind, and gas, greatly use them. We have also used new energy cars in our industrial parks, and that helps us to reduce the consumption of power in our industrial parks. These innovative measures can promote sustainable development. At the same time, it has also elevated our company's competitiveness. Thank you.
Jennifer, one of the, we all talk about innovation. Everybody builds on innovation, but what are the big obstacles, really to make innovation work? Will we really have the innovations, to make it work?
I think the biggest obstacle that we don't talk about enough is that the community rejects all of this. For many people in the community, globalization, technology is a frightening concept, and we have to make sure that sustainability is more than just about emissions reduction. It's got to be about the improvement of living standards. So off the back of my concern about the community's rejection is my concern about government responses. Governments make bad decisions, they retreat to nationalism, they reject supply chains, they stall energy transition, or they intervene in markets very unhelpfully. My fundamental concern, though, is that there is a lack of dynamism, particularly in the G7 economies, that is not equipped to manage this transition at the speed it needs to be managed. The technology change is so fundamental, so fast, geography, starting point won't matter anymore. Value will be created by the inventors, the risk takers, the inclusive societies. And I think there are two forces at work that don't get talked about enough. The first force is the rise of the consumer. The consumer will decide and dictate new business models. The consumer will be power generators, solar providers. They will disintermediate these big energy supply chains. And the second, of course, is the decarbonisation at the company level and the country level. And I always say that needs to get into the DNA of companies and the soul of countries. All of this, I think, requires the B20 and the G20 to give a renewed focus on coordinating for impact that dynamism. And that's a fundamental role here over the next couple of days. The mobility of labour, the skilling of people for the transition, for task change, for industry change, the reimagination of multilateralism and including this transition in multilateral agreements, the fast-tracking of new business models and removing the friction to business model creation and investment, removing the barriers to investment, huge investment in R&D, unleashing intellectual capability, a renewed effort on productivity and wages. If this transition comes with a decade of wage stagnation, it will be rejected by the community. Therefore, we need to unleash productivity and wage rises for people across the globe. And that requires predictability of market structures, particularly in energy, because fundamentally this has got to be done by the private sector. And I'm concerned that we do not have the dynamism that's going to unleash the private sector innovation and investment that's going to get this transition done in a way that lifts the living standards of all people.
Very good. Michael, you have been the president of COP24, and we are now at COP27. How optimistic are you about progress, and what do you see as the key obstacles to really moving forward, both in terms of innovation, but of course then also creating a more sustainable and resilient economy around the world?
Thank you very much. Well, I'm optimistic by nature, so if you ask this question, following what Jennifer just said, she spoke the language of COP24, of Katowice, just transition. So how to get our societies from fossil fuel-based economies to new clean tech economy. This is what we call a gradual shift, and we need to have people at the heart of this shift. And this was symbolically what happened in Katowice. That's a very industrial region in Poland, 4 million people employed in the mining industry, and right now we have more people working for IT than for mining. That's what we call a gradual change. So what I'm proud of and what I'm happy that we have right now a set of rules governing global climate policy. We have Paris Agreement, we have Katowice rulebook. But if you ask me where I'm pessimistic, I have been president of COP. I have presided over ministerial meeting of Food and Agriculture Organization, International Energy Organizations, and many others. And let me share you with one very pessimist thing. We will not make the change by doing these big messes. And especially now in the fragmented world. We have COVID and southern countries are disillusioned about the ability of northern countries to provide them with finance. We have war by Russia in Ukraine, and we have tectonic waves all over the world in terms of energy prices, gas prices, inflation, food insecurity, water problems. We have environmental and climate crisis. So where is the solution? And this is my deep belief that we need to change the way we move forward on this path. First of all, it's go from global negotiations to local implementation. It's exactly what has been just said. We need to make sure that local bottom-up dynamics are created among communities so that communities become more resilient, they can produce their own energy, they can produce their own food, they can have water savings. So we need to equip them with technologies. And that would be my last point, a call for my colleagues in G20, and that could be also a call by B20 community to G20. We need to think of different new ways of international solidarity. It will be extremely complicated to mobilize new finance out of developing countries. And I have just come back from Sharm el-Sheikh from COP27. But we need technology. So let's create a global fund of technological solidarity. Let's put intellectual properties inside this fund and let's share them in controlled manner so that it allows developing countries to benefit fully from this shift to clean technologies. This is the only practical way that we can advance in a given circumstances. So I'm optimist by nature, and I believe that this call will be heard and that will be having lots of fruits in the coming months.
Good. Shobana, you heard Michael mentioning the pandemic, and so, you know, as the chairperson of Apollo Hospitals, you know, how do you see innovation really shaping not just your industry but the whole economy, given that you are so closely involved in the healthcare sector, and how can we make all our economies more resilient by really upgrading the activities in the healthcare sector?
When India went into lockdown March 22nd, 2020, in our hospitals we have 10,000 beds and more than 7,000 doctors had no access to their patients. Fortunately, 1 month before that we had launched our digital app. So within 45 days we brought 3,000 doctors online to do teleconsults. And I think this was the live example of what innovation and technology could actually serve for the greater good. And I think from there, the story is just how ubiquitous that healthcare, you know, technology is for healthcare and innovation is for healthcare. And we continue to push that boundary, not just India, but I think all over the world. Even the smallest of countries have realized that, you know, a couple of things. If they want to have greater access for their people, you need to bring in healthcare technology, whether it's through video consult in the highest mountain, or, you know, to be able to deliver drugs through drones. Or, you know, there's so many use cases now available that really make it live. But the most important thing I think we have to understand, and this is the battle of our times, or this is the challenge of our times, that innovation will come and innovation will get funded. And there will be enough people at governments and private sector who will bring this together to collaborate and bring vaccines to the world at the time that we needed it most. But the real two things that bother us in our times that we have to keep thinking about is ethics. We can push the boundary of any one of these, but have we started questioning whether we should change the entire DNA of the human or how humanity will look, or everything that we look at, what are the second order consequences. So I think ethics, especially in forums like this, has to play a serious role. And the next thing I talk about is equity. What is the point in having $1 million cure if only 0.01% of humanity can access it? So I think equity is super important, and equity comes from, not making a difference between the color of your skin or your gender or where you live. So I think more and more of healthcare must talk, and across the board, whether it's sustainability or any other field of business, we have to start engaging and asking ourselves these questions.
Very good. Anderson, last but not least, I want to, in this first round of questions, I want to, hear from you about the key learnings, on, using innovation, pushing innovation, the obstacles, but also, I think the success stories.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm probably the only Indonesian company amongst this panelists, so I can bring a little bit of insights how very practical things that we've done in the last 3-4 years actually have materialized in driving sustainability. Take, for example, just now, I think Mr. Bill Winters mentioned that solar panel, in terms of CapEx costs, has dropped over 80%. So companies like us, we generate most of our energy from renewable sources because we're in the cellulose pulp business. But there's still 10% of our energy from fossil fuel. And what we did was, in 2020, we invested in our first megawatt of solar panel. And the payback at that point of time was 11 years. But because CapEx continued to drop in terms of solar panels, coal prices go up, so fossil fuel price go up. Our payback right now is less than 6.5 years, and we expanded our solar panel from 1 megawatt to 11 megawatt and 25 megawatt next year and 50 megawatt by 2025. My point being is, you don't need crazy innovation to actually implement sustainability. Take practical solutions that are already in existence, and private sectors like us, even Indonesia, this is not Europe, can actually make a big difference. In doing so, we're able to reduce our emissions over 5% in terms of our fossil fuel consumption. So these are very pragmatic solutions, and a lot of other companies in Indonesia are doing. And if we can do it in Indonesia, I think many other countries in the whole of ASEAN can also do it. That's first. Second, of course, Indonesia is always a big question of forest. The threat of deforestation, land use change, etc. We're also in the plantation business. Actually, in COP21 in Paris 7 years ago, we pledged something called 1 for 1. So 1 hectare of plantation, but every hectare of plantation, we have 1 hectare of conservation. So private sectors actually have a huge role to play in nature-based solutions to reduce emissions. So in that process, we have about 150,000 hectares of restoration project in the beautiful province of Riau. And last year, it went through a Vera carbon audit, actually. It's one of the largest carbon projects registered, over 350 million tons of avoided emissions for 56 years. My point being is, you don't need crazy innovation. Take proven technologies, existing framework. It's not perfect, but not doing anything is not a solution.
Thank you very much, Anderson. I would like to, have a second round of questions, to all of you, and in its two-pronged question, what do you see as the role of B20, in really helping innovation and technology, and more generally, in creating a more sustainable and resilient economy? And at the same time, what are specific actions that you want us to take today? Yeah, Jennifer, maybe I start with you.
I think the first thing is to coordinate for impact, because I think I'm concerned about this bifurcation and this decoupling process. If we don't have the rising tide lifting all boats, to use that expression, I think we'll get that community pushback that I talked about. And so coordinate that drive for dynamism, which we see in Asian economies, but we're not seeing it so much in the G7 economies. I think act in tandem with the G20 to unleash the power of the private sector, because it still is the greatest force for innovation and technology, but drive greater accountability with the G20. I've gone through all the communiques in the last 10 years, and I challenged someone else to do the table I did a couple of days ago, just to check how many actions have actually been done at a global scale. and there's not many that fit into that category. So a focus on action. I think one action that we could take today that I think is really important is the point about morality and ethics. So technology and innovation are going to bring up a whole new construct around what is moral-driven growth, what is morality-driven growth, what is ethically delivered technology, whether it's cyber, whether it's healthcare, whether it's decarbonisation. The issue, I think, is for this B20 and perhaps for the B20 in India to really focus on what that ethical framework looks like. Because if we do not do this, we'll find ourselves at the next G20 still talking about that community rejection, that community divide, which is pushing against governments taking the structural actions they have to take to get this done.
Thank you. Maybe, John, I can ask you about, what can B20 do, and also what would you specifically, engage on immediately, if you were to make it work?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is focus on standards and frameworks. This is a very complicated transition, and in order to have productive discussions, we need to have standards and frameworks where we can discuss clearly. So I think there's a lot of initiatives going on right now. I know GFANZ is just one in the financial world. There are other initiatives. So I think just being clear on what the correct standards or the best effective standards today are, and making sure that everybody has some involvement and understanding of that would go a long way. And then I think the second thing would be around sort of silo busting between government, company, finance, and civil society. Because as a platform, I think we need all of those to come together to have effective change.
Very good. Joe, I understand that this is the first time you are at the B20. So how do you see, the B20 helping to create a more resilient and sustainable economy? And what actions would you like to see coming from the B20 here in Bali?
Sustainability, I don't think we should set one set of standards. It should be tailored according to the country, according to the sector, to define the standards. But the only standard must be total participation. It is not just a participation of the government leaders or the level management only. If the participation is only confined to the high level, then the policy cannot continue to be implemented. For example, in our enterprise, we produce stainless steel, and our products have extended lifespan of the steel by 3 to 5 times. So I think the product itself is a good continuation. In addition, how do we promote the sustainability of our enterprises? First, must let everyone feel that there is some benefit for them. We have a very large organization, and the cultural standard of our employees may not be so high. So a few years ago, we talked about innovative approach to develop our area as a tourist resort in the industrial park. So we want our employees to have a sense of pride and to have society supervise what we do. So if we can maintain a united outlook, so this environmental concept can be implemented successfully and effectively in our enterprises. So we use IT, we use information so that we can improve our resource utilization. We use solar, we use new energy vehicles so that we can achieve certain green standards. But the successful implementation of every measure is a challenge. to the employers, it is a new challenge. So I believe to promote sustainability, the first step and the most important step is to unite the thinking pattern of all.
Shobana, your take. You know, you've already mentioned, you know, ethics, morality as key steps, but, you know, very concrete things that we should be doing now and maybe which the B20 can really start, you know, getting done.
Yeah, I think that the reason for us in business to come to forums like this is because there's really not just a global connection, but this is really a forum where governments and business is talking to each other. So one of the best examples I can give is in our country, the Unified Payments Institution. So when they started that, nobody in the world believed that you could have that, you know, it was so disruptive because it took away the entire layer and said of payments. And so we just use a number and it can be bank to B2C, B2B, anywhere and everywhere. It's ubiquitous and it's just a federated model, and it took down so many established, entrenched, you know, it took away the, really reimagined, it allowed so many small businesses to come in, and I think that inclusiveness that it created, the transparency it created, is something that now what India can do is help so many parts of the world to say, let us help you open up. And I think that is where governments and business will start to collaborate to see what it is we can do for the greater good, to be able to take some of these down to, you know, because most of us in G20 have very large populations. And we also have a very K-shaped economy, that they're the very rich and then they're struggling. And in that, we have to find innovations that can go deeper and strengthen the overall economy. And that's where I would stop of saying that the more innovations we have. So I particularly like the themes that Indonesia took. And as we move in India towards taking over the presidency, one of the first things we did is we said, let's not disrupt too much of what those themes are, because the agenda is not finished. And I think this continuity of agenda is very important also.
Very good, thank you. Anderson, what's your take? How would you like to push us all forward?
I have the most difficult job because everyone has had such good recommendations. But again, I think I'm 100% aligned with everyone. Standards, framework, and let the market do itself, right? So I hope one thing that we can take away from B20 is solidifying the carbon market. Very important topic for Indonesia. How can we put a value on a standing natural forest? This is always a big question mark. And once the carbon market is established, we can do that in Indonesia and in many other parts of the world. So a lot of has been said. So standards, frameworks, and let the market do itself. And specifically for one takeaway, if we can really drive the carbon market agenda, it'll be a fantastic takeaway out of this B20. So.
Very good. Michael, you know, you have been there at many these big meetings, you know, some optimism, you know, also some pessimism that you expressed earlier. What would you like us to do going from here?
I think that it would be great if we are able to realize all the ideas that you just proposed. But my experience from big international meetings, especially when you start to have many partners and with divergent views sometimes on different subjects, let's not expect a silver bullet neither. I mean, it would be great to have all of this, but what I think at least that we could expect out of G20, so the most powerful economies in the world, might agree on values that we want to bring forward in terms of where we want humanity, because when we are driving the most populous and the most powerful economies of the world, in fact, we are sometimes setting the direction for the world. And my guess is that there is right now a questioning of global liberal order, and there are many different conflicting ideas and values about, so how should this new world look like? And if we are able to put at the center of this new world order values such as prosperity based on cooperation, dialogue for peace, respect for the planet, respect for people, then we will be winning. And if G20 can show the way in terms of values to be followed, then we will all win.
Very good. Let me maybe, in conclusion, emphasize that, you know, even though there were some words of skepticism, I think there is good reasons to be optimistic. At the Boston Consulting Group, we've worked with many countries and even cities, big companies and medium-sized companies in developed markets, but also in emerging markets, you know, defining their path to net zero over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And as Bill Winters has mentioned earlier, many of the innovations that we are also hoping for are not yet fully developed. There is a good path for countries, for cities, for companies, and I think for all of us to move forward. But of course it requires enormous efforts. It requires trying out many things, experimenting, innovation, even accepting there will be setbacks. There will be years when we will not make progress, but I think it really requires all our efforts, you know, very much as Joe has emphasized and also Shobana, you know, really mobilizing everybody, because everybody, all of us and all of the people out there can make a contribution, have to make a contribution, and if we all do that, we'll make it work. So let's make it work and enjoy the rest of the time here in Bali, the reception tonight, and actually many of the discussions tomorrow, and work together and exchange ideas. Together we'll make it work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mr. Bergner and the esteemed speakers. And thank you, Mr. Bergner, for the summary of the discussion. And I believe that the audience can gain benefits, new insights, and also new inspiration from the dialogue that you moderated. And thank you so much once again for your summary. That makes my life easier, actually. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are a few points that we also can gain from the discussion. From Anderson Tanoto, for example, that you don't need crazy innovations to achieve sustainable energy, but use what's available, proven technology, existing framework. Doing nothing is not a solution. And also from Mikhail Kurtika, that he's optimistic about the net zero emission by 2050 by performing gradual shift for people to use renewable energy instead of fossil fuel. And last but not least, we need to change the way we move forward from global negotiation to local implementation. And communities become more resilient and they can produce their own energy and also food. So, ladies and gentlemen, Bapak Ibu yang terhormat, today we have listened to so many thoughtful discussions and heard intriguing insights from all of our esteemed speakers. And on behalf of the committee, we would like to thank all of our guests and also speakers for attending the first day of the B20 Summit. And we have such a wonderful dialogue and sessions, didn't we? And please allow me to conclude today's agenda by first thanking to all of our sponsors, PT Astra International Tbk, PT Bayan Resources Tbk, PT Indika Energy Tbk, Sinarmas, April Group, Bakri Group, PT Bank Sentral Asia Tbk, PT Bank Negara Indonesia Persero Tbk, PT Elang Mahkota Teknologi Tbk, PT GoTo Gojek Tokopedia Tbk, PT HM Sampurna Tbk, Indonesia Financial Group or IFG, PT Indofood Sukses Makmur Tbk, Lipo Group, Permata Bank, PT Pertamina Persero, PT Sawit Sumber Mas Sarana Tbk, PT Telekomunikasi Indonesia Persero Tbk, PT Virtue Dragon Nickel Industrial Park. And would also thank Adaro Indonesia, Jarum Foundation, and PT Grab Teknologi Indonesia. Before officially closing today's agenda, I would like to quickly share some information for delegates who are invited to the B20 reception dinner tonight.
Distinguished
the shuttle bus,
delegates, welcome to Indonesia and I'm so delighted to host this G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in Bali, the island of thoughts.
Belakangan, pemerintah disibukkan dengan rangkaian konferensi tingkat tinggi G20 yang berpuncak pada 15-16 November 2022 di Bali. Sebenarnya, apa sih G20 yang sering diobrolin sama pemerintah ini? Memangnya G20 penting bagi masyarakat banyak? Mari kita coba lihat fakta-fakta seputar G20. G20 atau Group of 20 adalah forum kerjasama antara 19 negara dan Uni Eropa untuk membicarakan masalah-masalah yang sedang terjadi di dunia. G20 dibentuk sejak tahun 1999 atas inisiatif anggota G7 untuk merangkul negara lain agar dapat bersama-sama mengatasi krisis global. Keanggotaan G20 kini beragam, mulai dari Amerika Serikat, Tiongkok, Afrika Selatan, sampai Indonesia. G20 tidak memiliki ketua ataupun kantor tetap. Oleh karena itu, koordinasi G20 dipegang oleh 3 negara sekaligus. Saat ini, koordinasi dipegang Italia, yang mengadakan KTT tahun lalu. Indonesia yang mengadakan tahun ini, dan India yang mendapat giliran untuk tahun depan. Indonesia sendiri resmi jadi presidensi G20 setelah KTT G20 di Italia berakhir tahun lalu. Dengan rumit dan panjangnya prosesi yang berlangsung, seberapa penting rangkaian acara G20? Ternyata cukup penting, karena pemimpin negara yang hadir mewakili mayoritas penduduk dunia dan sebagian besar perdagangan maupun PDB dunia. Forum G20 mencakup 60% populasi dunia, 75% perdagangan global, dan 80% PDB dunia masuk dalam negara-negara anggota G20. Jadi, masalah-masalah yang berkaitan dengan mayoritas penduduk dunia akan dibahas dan dicoba penyelesaiannya di forum penting ini.
Baik teman kumparan, demikianlah rangkaian acara untuk B20 Indonesia Summit untuk hari pertama, di mana besok hari merupakan hari kedua untuk B20 Indonesia Summit juga akan diselenggarakan masih dari Nusa Dua Bali, dan tentunya masih ada sejumlah diskusi panel yang akan dilakukan besok, di mana beberapa narasumber yang akan hadir besok diantaranya juga adalah Anne Hathaway, kemudian Jeff Bezos yang dikabarkan akan mengisi acara atau mengisi panel diskusi pada hari kedua B20 Indonesia Summit. Dan tadi kita sudah menyaksikan beberapa panel diskusi yang tentunya berkaitan dengan tema yang diangkat dalam acara B20 kali ini. Nah, jelang acara puncak G20 yang nantinya juga akan diselenggarakan setelah B20 Summit, tepatnya pada tanggal 14 sampai 15, maksud kami 15 sampai 16 November 2022 mendatang. Ini ada berbagai hal yang menarik perhatian tentunya ya. Tapi selain itu ada salah satu hal juga yang tidak kalah menarik perhatian atau disoroti, yaitu soal ornamen penyambutan khas Bali, yaitu penjor. Nah, ornamen cantik ini sudah terlihat dipasang di sepanjang jalan menuju lokasi KTT G20. Untuk itu kami mempunyai liputannya yang akan kita saksikan bersama-sama. Video ini sekaligus menutup live streaming kumparan.com hari ini, dan jangan lupa untuk menyaksikan live streaming kumparan besok hari, di mana besok merupakan hari kedua untuk gelaran B20 Summit Indonesia, dan kami tentunya masih akan melaporkan bagaimana jalannya event tersebut hingga acara puncak KTT G20 nanti langsung dari Nusa Dua Bali. Saya Melisa Lolindo dan segenap tim yang bertugas mohon pamit undur diri. Terima kasih banyak, sampai jumpa.
Dalam perhelatan KTT G20 ini sebanyak 2.500 penjor dipasang di sepanjang ruas jalan, mulai dari Bandara Internasional I Gusti Ngurah Rai hingga ke lokasi pertemuannya. Penjor dengan tinggi kurang lebih 5 meter yang terpasang untuk penyambutan para tamu VVIP ini memiliki spanduk kecil yang bertuliskan G20 Indonesia 2022. Penjor yang dibuat untuk penyambutan diakui berbeda dengan penjor yang biasa digunakan untuk upacara. Harga penjor hias untuk KTT G20 dipatok 1,7 juta rupiah untuk ukuran sedang yang dipasang di jalan. Sedangkan untuk ukuran besar, ini dipasang di hotel dipatok seharga 3,5 juta rupiah per penjornya. Diketahui penjor merupakan simbol dari naga basuki yang berarti kesejahteraan dan kemakmuran. Memasang penjor biasanya memiliki tujuan sebagai ungkapan terima kasih atas kemakmuran yang diberikan oleh Tuhan.